Hi, I'm David Herriot from endtheunion.scot, the website that tells the real story of how Scotland came to be in a union with England, of how Scotland came to be in the UK. And more importantly, it also tells how we can escape from that union without asking. And that's the theme of the website. Take, don't ask. Take our independence back. Stop asking for a referendum because you're not going to get one and we don't need one anyway. In 1707, Scotland entered a union with England. Why? Why would we do such a thing? What on earth possessed us to join a union with England? How, 400 years after the signing of the Declaration of Arbroath, did England pull us into a union so unequal that it began to exploit and rob us as soon as their ink was dry in the paper? You'll mind from the last video that Scotland's international trade had been hamstrung by England's introduction of the Navigation Acts, which prevented European countries from trading directly with the English colonies. But for Scotland, the impact of their trade was much, much worse, because England had deliberately sabotaged Scotland's colony at Darien on the east coast of Central America. Because for England, the lessons from Darien were clear. Scotland could be a threat to England's own empire building plans. So that colony had to be destroyed. But more importantly, Scotland had to be neutralised. And it would be neutralised through a union with England that would turn Scotland from a competitor into an English resource. And so Scotland was put under immense pressure to come to the negotiating table and join this union. And in 1705, it really turned the screws on Scotland with its introduction of the Alien Act. The Alien Act, remember, was only there to force Scotland to the negotiating table. It cut all trade between Scotland and England. If you had property or lands in England, too bad, it could be confiscated, and all Scots in England would be treated as foreign nationals, as aliens, liable to be deported. It was effective blackmail, and it forced Scotland to the negotiating table and appoint commissioners to negotiate a treaty of union. A treaty, mind you, because Scotland and England were still independent nation states, and the only way that two independent states could join a political and economic union was through a treaty. But by 1706, the articles of the treaty were agreed and presented to Queen Anne. Queen Anne, of course, Queen of Scotland and England. Handy that, of course, when one country is trying to force another country into a union and you've got pressure from the same queen. But just because the treaty was agreed, that wasn't the end of the story. Something needed to happen to put the treaty into law. And that law was that, and that action was ratification. Each country's parliament had to ratify or approve the treaty. And so this is the term you've probably heard about when you've heard about the union with England, the Act of Union. The Act of Union with England had to go through the Scottish Parliament, and the Act of Union with Scotland had to go through the English Parliament. And at the back end of 1706, the Act of Union with Scotland scooshed through the English Parliament. It was no big deal, it was part of the plan anyway. But it's useful to look at some of the exchanges in the English Parliament as the bill progressed its way through. An English MP, for example, shouted, "We have Scotland on the rack," to which the English Speaker of the English Parliament, a guy called John Smith, cackled in reply, "We have catched Scotland, and we will bind her fast." I'll just repeat that. "We have catched Scotland, and we will bind her fast." Do you see what's going on here? That was all part of the plan to shackle Scotland to England. In Scotland, of course, things were a bit different. It was by no means certain that the Act of Union with England would be passed by the Scottish Parliament. So just to make things sure that the Act would pass, England sent a bunch of spies up to Scotland and sent a bunch of gold as well and promise of lands in England. And remember, many of the aristocrats in the Scottish Parliament had lost their shirts on Darien, and their loyalty to the country didn't stretch beyond their trouser pocket. They were easy meat for English bribes. And just to make absolutely sure that the Scottish Parliament voted for union, England camped its army on the border with specific threats it would invade if the vote didn't go the right way. You see, that's how the Union came to be. It was forced on Scotland. And in January 1707, the Scottish Parliament passed the Act of Union with England. And Union Day was set for May the 1st, 1707. That's why we have the holiday on May the 1st every year. We don't, do we? Nobody celebrates that day. In fact, in Scotland, on Union Day, on May the 1st, 1707, the bells of the High Kirk of St Giles on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh rang out to the tune of "Why Am I So Sad on This My Wedding Day?" Because it was an appropriate sentiment. It's estimated that 90 to 95% of the Scottish people were against the Union when they found out. And they found out, of course, in January 1707, because the Act of Parliament, the Act of Union with England, was not signed in the Scottish Parliament because the parliamentarians were chased out of the Parliament by the Edinburgh mob. And so the Act of Union with England was signed in a basement of a building on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. That basement's still there, by the way. It's now a toilet. You see, when the people found out, that's your ancestors, by the way, they were furious. They were raging. They rioted all over Scotland, which had to be put down with military means. But it was too late. The deed had been done. Scotland's independence had been sold to another country. And that's how the Union came to be. There was never any glorious, joyous coming together of two countries united in common purpose. It was an English takeover designed to change Scotland from an independent state, from a competitor, to an English resource that could be exploited as soon as the ink was dry. Only the British state thinks of the Union as precious. And well, it might. It got everything it wanted, and it took much, much more than the treaty allowed. The exploitation of Scotland is probably a subject actually from another video, because this is going to be a bit too long now. But one thing we should look at just before the video ends, just in case you get too depressed by the whole thing, is that wee clause that was inserted into the Treaty of Union and reflected in both Acts of Union. The wee clause is an escape clause, and why we can get out of this union without asking. The clause that was hidden from Scots for hundreds of years and only recently rediscovered by Salvo. That is how we'll get out of the union, and that will be a subject for another video. Or of course, you can look at the website endtheunion.scot. Alright,